I would like to call to order the special board meeting of Monday, December 16th, 2024. As is our custom, we begin our board meetings with the singing of our national anthem. We're very honored today to have a pre-recorded video of students from Western Canada High School performing O Canada. I would ask everyone to please stand and follow the lead of the students. The Calgary Board of Education acknowledges the traditional territories and oral practices of the Treaty 7 nations, including the Siksika-Siksika, comprised of the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, and the Amskapi-Piikani nations. We acknowledge the Tsuut'ina Nation, the Ayarhe Nakota, comprised of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney nations, the Métis Nation within Alberta, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. This land on which we gather is traditionally known as Mohkinstsis, Gosisei, Winchispa Nakota, and Otuscony. As a learning organization, we are committed to advancing the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action focused on education for reconciliation. Oki, Dada Nastara, Amba Wastich, Tansei, Tani Shi, bonjour, hello, and welcome to all our staff and public in attendance at this meeting. Representing our stakeholder groups, I would like to recognize Clay Gordon of the Canadian Union of Pacific Employees Local 40. Our first item of business is to approve the agenda for today's meeting. Ms. Miner, do you have any changes that need to be noted?
Madam Chair, there are no agenda changes to be noted for today's meeting.
Could I have a motion that the agenda be approved as submitted? Thank you, Trustee May. Those in favor of the motion? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. The only item on today's agenda is the bylaw to require police information checks for trustee candidate nominations. The Alberta government initiated amendments to the Local Authorities Election Act through the Municipal Affairs Statutes Amendment Act, which came into force on October 31st, 2024. One of the amendments to the Local Authorities Election Act provides elected authorities the opportunity to consider requiring candidates to provide a criminal record check as part of their nomination papers. The Board of Trustees requested administration to provide a criminal record check bylaw for the board's consideration, which is the report being considered today. Whereas today is the first time for this board to consider a bylaw, I want to provide an overview of the process. As required under the Education Act, each bylaw requires 3 readings. The first motion for the board to consider in connection with each reading will be for the board to authorize the reading of the bylaw. The bylaw will then be read by Corporate Secretary Miner, following by a motion for the board to consider approval of the reading. Trustees, questions or comments on the report? Trustee Vukadinovich. Trustee May?
Thank you. I'm curious about our own CBE processes. Are police information checks required for all of our staff or just who may be alone with a student? I'm wondering, we're talking about the 16,000 employee kind of range for police checks?
Through the chair, so all CBE employees who are hired are expected to provide us with a police information check on hiring and prior to commencement of employment. Specific CBE employees are subject to police information checks that include vulnerable sector checks, including those teachers who are governed by the applicable provisions of the Education Act that require vulnerable sector checks every 5 years. And our practice is to not have employees start without a police information check.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
Are school boards obliged to pass a bylaw requiring a police information check for election candidates?
Through the chair, elected authorities are not required to pass a criminal record check bylaw.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
I attended a session of the Alberta School Boards Association where I learned that candidates for federal office do not have to submit police information checks in order to run for office as a member of parliament. And candidates for provincial office in any province in Canada do not have to submit police information checks in order to run for office as a member of the Legislative Assembly, so as MLAs. And so I was wondering what work was done to examine the reasons for, historically, has anyone ever considered asking MP or MLA candidates to submit police information checks in order to run? What were the pros and cons of that? Why in all of this time, in over 100 years of Confederation, do we not have police information checks for people who are basically setting policy for our country and for our province?
So this is a question, or do you want to finish? Yeah.
Sure, I'll just provide perhaps a bit of information and then chair if you wish to speak. Through the chair, so this change through the...
Point of order, I don't know if we can hear through the microphone for recordings.
Through the chair, these amendments that allowed, the amendment to the Local Authorities Election Act that allow for elected authorities to consider bylaws just came into force on October 31st of 2024. So given this short period of time, there hasn't been a lot of opportunity for any type of research as it relates to this in particular change to legislation.
Thank you. My next question is, are certain people more likely to have interactions with police than others based on their identity in terms of belonging to an identifiable group? If so, is there a risk that this bylaw could have a chilling effect on individuals' decision to run for office based on their identity?
Trustee Vukadinovich, I wonder if you might bring that into your debate as opposed to a question, which neither administration nor do we have the information to answer that. Trustee Vukadinovich?
There are various ways to obtain police information checks, as we know, including from private third-party providers. And I appreciate that this bylaw provides clarity that the draft bylaw provides clarity that this particular one would have to be obtained from the Calgary Police Service. There are people in our city who would have zero criminal convictions, yet who would have extensive involvement with police due to their lived experience with complex circumstances. If so, is there a risk that this bylaw could have a chilling effect on individuals' decision to run for office based on their fear or anxiety around entering a police services station?
I would again say perhaps save that for your debate because I don't think that's something we can answer right now. Trustee Vukadinovich?
I see that this draft bylaw states that every candidate for the office of school board trustee shall be responsible for the cost of the police information check. I went online and I see that this cost is $75, and this is on top of the $100 nomination fee. So essentially, we would be increasing the upfront cost of submitting nomination papers to $175 per candidate. Meanwhile, other jurisdictions choose not to charge candidates any fees whatsoever as part of the nomination process in order to increase equity and level the playing field for candidates who live with various levels of income. Is there a risk this bylaw could place an additional barrier for those potential candidates who live with low income?
Same response as before, that perhaps that's something to bring up in your debate.
So does that mean we don't know?
Well, it would be something to be researched, I assume. So yes, we can't answer that right now.
So we,
I'll just go to Trustee May.
Thank you. I'm wondering how many volunteers do we have within our system who've provided a PIC and a vulnerable sector check?
Through the chair, apologies, I don't have the exact number of volunteers. What we do have is an administrative regulation, and I should have mentioned this earlier, with employees, for both employees and volunteers requiring police information checks for volunteers wishing to participate in school-based activities. That's managed by principals at the school level, and to my knowledge, that is a standard practice across all of our schools.
Trustee Vukadinovich.
I believe this is my seventh question. If a board of trustees, or maybe sixth, sorry, I think I lost track. If a board of trustees were to pass a bylaw requiring a police information check for election candidates, is there any risk of a person or organization taking the school board to court to object to the bylaw? If so, what could participation in a court case like this potentially cost the CBE? And is the CBE setting aside funds just in case a group or an individual takes our school board to court over this bylaw?
This question would require us to go in camera to answer that. So I guess just looking to my fellow trustees, is there interest to move in camera to get a response to this question? I'm seeing a couple of shaking heads. Yeah, do you have another question you can ask right now?
Sure, and I can come back to this one because it is something, as a trustee of a system, I'm concerned if there are risks. I would like to know. My next question is, in general, what are the anticipated additional costs to the CBE if we were to pass this bylaw? And what costs have we spent so far in drafting it?
Through the chair, in relation to the CBE's election costs, the City of Calgary has advised that there would only be a nominal increase to pay for the city staff to review the PIC as part of the nomination paper and redact the candidate's address for the PIC.
Trustee Vukadinovich.
Do we have a sense of how much has been spent so far in drafting this bylaw and researching, doing the research required to understand the business case for doing this?
Through the chair, so the drafting of the bylaw and any work related to it was done by in-house legal services, which are provided to the organization on a day-to-day basis. So no additional cost other than what we pay on a daily basis to have a corporate lawyer do this kind of work for us. Thank you.
Trustee Vukadinovich.
And did that include the cost of research to understand the business case and the pros and cons and risks and benefits of passing a bylaw like this?
Through the chair, the costs were those incurred to provide materials in support of the board's decision to place this on their agenda. And that is part of our day-to-day routine business within legal services in the Office of the Corporate Secretary. Thank you.
So Trustee Vukadinovich, I might add that no research was requested. The government gave us latitude to consider whether or not we want to see police information checks as part of future CBE trustee candidate nomination papers. And as a board, there was enough interest to do so. So we brought it forward to debate at a public meeting, which we're doing now, and had not requested additional research. Trustee Vukadinovich.
That's a good segue into my next question then. When the provincial government passed legislation that made it possible for school boards to introduce bylaws requiring election candidates to submit police information checks, Did the news release include information stating what problem such a bylaw would be intended to solve? And to that point, what problem would a police information check bylaw be intended to solve?
Well, no research was reported on this, so neither the board nor the administration is prepared to respond to that. Trustee Vukadinovich?
For clarity, so we don't know what problem we're trying to solve if we were to pass this bylaw?
Through the chair, while I certainly don't want to speak on behalf of the provincial government, I think they did include this in a number of changes to Local Authorities Election Act, some of which was to provide local authorities such as school boards and municipality the authorities to require police information checks as a mechanism to support information being available to the electorate that might be relevant to them when they're voting. So that, at a very simple level, is the policy rationale, one of the policy rationales for this legislation, in terms of what the government was hoping to, what problem they were hoping to tackle. I think that question is sort of best answered by the elected officials at the provincial level, and I'm really hesitant as administration to speak on their behalf. Thank you.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
Well, that is helpful to know, but what are we, as a Calgary Board of Education, what problem are we trying to solve?
That would be a question for debate and for the board to consider. Trustee Vukadinovich?
Well, yeah, and if we can get clarity in the debate about what is the problem we're trying to solve, then is that also the best place for me to gain clarity about whether the proposed solution will solve the problem as it's defined? Because that is another question I have, is does the intended solution solve the problem?
And I would say, I guess that's a decision for your colleagues to consider and make. Trustee Vukadinovich?
Often issues that require trustee decision are brought to the board by administration or by trustees themselves, or because of an advocacy campaign by an organized group, or because of a groundswell of public opinion. Who is driving the push for police information checks for trustee election candidates in Alberta? Who is asking for this?
Well, I can't speak to Alberta since this is our organization, but as a board, we deemed there was enough interest as a Board of Trustees to bring this forward to discuss at a public board meeting. So it was us. Trustee Vukadinovich?
Just for clarity, so it was us, but we don't know what problem we're trying to solve. I'm just trying to see if I understand this correctly.
Well, on November 26th, when we discussed it, there was enough interest from the board to bring this forward to discuss whether or not we wanted to have police information checks as part of the nomination for CB trustee candidates. Trustee Vukadinovich?
Do we know which school boards in Alberta and Saskatchewan, which I believe are the only two jurisdictions to have passed a bylaw requiring police information checks for candidates? And I guess Saskatchewan is another jurisdiction, so I'll leave that aside. But do we know which school boards in Alberta have decided to pass a bylaw requiring police information checks for trustee candidates? Which ones haven't, and what were their reasons for doing so?
Through the chair, whereas this is fairly new legislative amendment, elected authorities are still turning their minds to the possibility of having a criminal record check bylaw. A cursory review of some of the urban elected authority websites indicated the following. The Calgary Catholic School Division passed a police information check bylaw on December 4th. The Peace Wapiti Public School Division passed a criminal check bylaw on November 28th. Grand Prairie School Division considered second and third reading of the criminal check bylaw on December 10th. However, they do not live stream their meetings, and as the minutes are not available for that meeting, I cannot advise as to the outcome of that. Edmonton Public School Division debated a criminal record check bylaw but did not implement one. The Edmonton Catholic School Division has one coming up on their agenda for a meeting later this month. And the City of Calgary is voting on their election bylaw on December 17th. The following public school board websites were reviewed. However, at this time, there were no indication that they were considering a criminal check bylaw. Lethbridge Public School Division, Red Deer Public School Division, Foothills School Division, Rocky View School Division, and Medicine Hat Public School Division. As it relates to their rationale for doing or not doing so, we would have to, a trustee or a member of the public would have to review their public meeting records to indicate their rationale.
Just a point of clarification, Chair. Rocky View School Division did consider it at their agenda, essentially the equivalent of their agenda planning committee, didn't bring it forward because of the time of the year. Rocky View Municipal Council did pass a bylaw.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
Thank you. Currently, to be accepted, a trustee candidate has to solemnly swear that they are at least 18 years old, a Canadian citizen, reside at an eligible address, and are not otherwise disqualified under the Local Authorities Election Act or the Education Act. This oath includes eligibility under Section 23.1 of the LAEA, which disqualifies candidates who have been convicted of certain offenses. Has any school board in Alberta passed a bylaw requiring proof of age from trustee candidates or proof of Canadian citizenship from trustee candidates? And what documentation are trustee candidates required to submit to prove their residency? So just trying to understand how we verify these other aspects of the requirements.
So through the chair, the distinction between I just want to sort of draw us up a bit, which is the Local Authorities Election Act sets the minimum requirements for candidacy. That includes things like residency and the other specified and legislated requirements. A police information check is discretionary within the local authorities' ability to either pass a bylaw or not. So we wouldn't see bylaws about things like residency or the other mandatory requirements of the Local Authorities Elections Act because they are in fact legislated and mandatory. So the Election Services Office will have policies and procedures in place to validate those mandatory aspects of candidacy. They will also have forms in place to have candidates validate the information that they are providing by affirming that the information is accurate and true. So that's a distinction. So you're not going to see a series of bylaws on all of the requirements to become a candidate because they're in fact defined for us in the legislation and don't require additional authority.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
Section 22-1 of the LAEA does outline some conditions where a person would be ineligible to run as a trustee, including if the person has within the previous 10 years, so not indefinitely, but within the previous 10 years been convicted of an offense under the LAEA, the Election Act, the Election Finances and Contributions Disclosure Act, or the Canada Election Act. This section does not mention convictions under the Criminal Code of Canada. Would a police information check provide information about whether the candidate has, within the previous 10 years, been convicted of an offense under the LAEA, the Election Act, the Election Finances and Contributions Disclosure Act, or the Canada Election Act?
Through the chair. So the Alberta Police Services, which sort of all the chiefs of police have a protocol on the content of police information checks as well as the process for them. So generally, things that are of provincial nature and provincial offenses, like driving and such, do not generally show up on a police information check unless they pose a threat to public safety. Similarly, sort of federal offenses that are under legislation other than the Criminal Code of Canada may not show up depending on the nature of that offense. What the police information check will include is information that's related to other provisions of the Local Authorities Elections Act, in particular 23.1, and the kinds of offenses that may lead to disqualification under that provision. And it will contain any other convictions that an individual may have. And again, that's information for the public to decide if that's of interest to them. Thank you.
Trustee Vukanovich?
Along that note, would the public be made aware of the contents of any police information checks submitted by nominees? If so, how would that notification take place?
Through the chair, the police information checks will form part of a candidate's nomination papers filed with the City of Calgary. All candidate nomination papers may be viewed in person by the public at the City of Calgary's election service offices during regular business hours.
Trustee Vukanovich?
If somebody were to have a look at this then and they find that there's information that would disqualify a candidate because of the candidate has been convicted of the offenses listed under section 23.1 of the LAEA, would a candidate automatically be disqualified from running, or would the elections folks be able to disqualify a candidate from running? And if not, then who would be responsible for bringing the matter to court?
Through the chair, violations under the Local Authorities Election Act fall under election services, which are managed by the City of Calgary on behalf of the CBE. The city has a process for handling violations under the Local Authorities Election Act.
Trustee Vukanovich?
So if somebody is disqualified from running because of a violation under the LAEA, the city would already know that. So there's already a check in place to make sure that a candidate who's not qualified for this reason to make sure that they would not qualify for running, so that we wouldn't accidentally have a candidate who actually shouldn't be there.
Through the chair, so I have been advised by the City of Calgary, if there was a reason that through a police information check that a candidate would be disqualified, there's a two-step process for them. One, they would advise the candidate of such, and they would refer the matter to the Calgary Police Services as an affidavit that's been falsely sworn.
If I can just add some additional information, Chair. I think there's a distinction to be drawn between offenses that may have been advanced by election services through the provincial court or court of Queen's Bench, depending on the nature of the offenses, because certain offenses under the Local Authorities Elections Act are managed through administrative penalties. Some are managed through letter of reprimand, and some are managed in provincial court and some in court of King's Bench. And those records generally are publicly available in election services. So the administrative authority administering elections may be aware of the kinds of offenses under 22 that would disqualify someone. In terms of 23.1, without a police information check, unless that conviction was very public and known, the way it would be surfaced is through a police information check. Wouldn't necessarily be information in the hands, and they'd be relying on the affirmation of candidates that they are fully qualified and that there are no disqualifying factors for candidacy. So that's sort of at a very high level what I think would happen. But this is all in the abstract, right? Thank you.
Trustee Vukanovich?
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with this concept. So just for clarity, because right now having a criminal record does not disqualify a candidate for running, nor would this bylaw create that. Like it still wouldn't disqualify a candidate for running. However, there are offenses under the Local Authorities Election Act and the Education Act that do disqualify a candidate. They're not the same as criminal offenses, but we already are able to know which people those are and make sure that they're disqualified without a police information check. This is just like a lot to wade through here.
So I'll do my best, right? Because I think it's I'm sort of trying to be supportive of building your understanding. So the act does disqualify, the Local Authorities Election Act disqualifies people from running where they are convicted of an offense punishable by imprisonment of 5 years or more, or convicted of offenses related to essentially what I'll call municipal corruption. So influence peddling, or the kind of activity that interferes with municipal elections, or who exceeds the rules around campaign finance and disclosure under Section 147 of the Local Authorities Elections Act. That information may be publicly available through the judicial courts, but wouldn't be something that would be readily available in the same way that a candidate submission of a public information check to the election services officers as part of their candidate action package would be. So that's the difference. So this bylaw, again, empowers the board to include as a requirement for candidacy the submission of a police information check. And election services role would be to validate whether the check is received or not. If the check indicates that there's a disqualification under 23.1, then there are processes in place within that body to ensure that disqualified candidates are not put on the slate. I'm going to trust that they have those processes. That's different from the other kinds of offenses that we discussed, which may not show up on a police information check, but might otherwise be in the information of election services, who again can validate those prior offenses. And failing that, the system has each candidate affirm their eligibility for candidacy. And should a candidate affirm that they're eligible when in fact they're not, there are consequences for that as well. So including disqualification and possibly referral to CPS. So that's sort of at a very high level, the checks and balances that are in place in relation to validating the mandatory requirements of eligibility. In terms of this bylaw, the process would be for election services to validate that it's been submitted. Thank you.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
According to the draft bylaw, police information checks submitted pursuant to subsection 1 must be dated no earlier than 6 months before the date on which a candidate submits their nomination paper. However, nomination papers can be submitted anytime between January 2nd, 2025 and September 22nd, 2025, which means that the police information check could be dated anywhere from as at July 2024 to as at September 2025, which is more than a year-long span. In other words, a different time frame applies to those submitting January 2nd on the first day of the nomination period versus those submitting on the last day of the nominating period. Is there a risk that this inconsistency could cause confusion about the value of the police information check?
Through the chair, we anticipate that the City of Calgary has a process to validate the police information checks submitted, and that it's in compliance with the requirements of any bylaw.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
Last time I did a police information check in order to volunteer at my children's schools, I had to select whether I was doing so as an employee or a volunteer. But school board trustee candidates are neither employees nor volunteers of a school division. And last I checked, the forms didn't have a box to check off for election candidates. Given that the CPS forms might have to be, the Calgary Police Services forms might have to be adjusted to easily include the requirement for candidates to complete a police information check, are we concerned about processing times and or challenges in meeting the nomination deadline? Will people actually be able to submit nomination papers on January 2nd, 2025?
Through the chair, in discussions with the city, we have not heard of any concerns about the ability of Calgary Police Services to handle these additional applications. I would further note that the Calgary Police Services website currently indicates that they accept applications for police information checks for employment, volunteer, and other purposes.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
The Alberta Police Information Check Disclosure Procedure states that vulnerable sector checks should only be requested when the applicant is entering a position where they will be directly responsible for the well-being of a vulnerable person, and the position is one of authority or trust relative to vulnerable people. So it appears that trustee election candidates would not meet the bar required to be eligible for a vulnerable sector check. If this police information check bylaw were to be passed by the Board of Trustees, how would we ensure that potential candidates know that they are not expected to get a vulnerable sector check? Because even parent volunteers at schools are confused and unclear about whether they need to get a vulnerable sector information check or not. So this is definitely an area where I anticipate the potential for confusion from candidates.
So the board did not request a vulnerable sector check to be a part of the police information check bylaw before the board today. Follow up?
Yeah, but how will we make sure that candidates understand that? Because that's the piece, it's the same thing with school volunteers, but there's confusion. And so there's that communication piece here about how will people be clear? Because the police services website also indicates that there are, like, I can't remember the wording that they have, but that you should not be asking for a vulnerable sector check unless you know you need one, because it costs taxpayers quite a bit of money. So they make sure that people aren't asking for one unless they need to. And so this has created confusion in the past with volunteers. And so for CB schools, I'm saying this in my capacity as somebody who's volunteered extensively with school councils and spoken with many parents about the challenges they face in getting police information checks to volunteer at their children's schools. So the vulnerable sector check does create confusion for parents. So what will we do to make sure that there isn't confusion for trustee candidates? And again, here I'm not talking about what's the content of the bylaw, but the implementation of a bylaw, the communication piece.
Through the chair, in my conversations with the City of Calgary, they've indicated to me that should the board decide to pass this bylaw, they will ensure that it is well advertised on the Election Services website about the type of police information check that is required. They will as well include our bylaw posted on the public website. The CBE public website has an election page. This bylaw will also be available there. So I think that candidates will probably hopefully be well informed, and should they reach out to the city will ensure that they're very clear on what type of police information check is required.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
What do we ask of candidates right now to prove the values that they run on, or to prove that they're running for school board trustee because they believe in the value of public education, that they're not just trying to get on the board to try to destroy public education from within? What do we do to verify the positions that people talk about when they're running?
Through the chair, in accordance with the Local Authorities Election Act, there are no requirements for specific expectations as to qualifications a candidate might have, other than those set forward in the Local Authorities Election Act. How an individual candidate campaigns and the information they share with the public is totally on their determination.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
Do we verify the educational qualifications that a candidate lists?
There's no requirement until the local, sorry, through the chair, my apologies, through the chair. There's no requirement until the Local Authorities Election Act to do so.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
Do we verify the employment history that a trustee candidate lists?
Through the chair, I think the question has been responded to, that what we validate is what is set out in the Local Authorities Election Act, and any additional requirements that may be passed through bylaw of the elected body, such as filing fees or a police information check. The other things you're speaking about, I don't believe were mandatory requirements, and therefore not validated by a school board.
Are there any other questions from trustees? Trustee Vukadinovich?
If a trustee candidate just happens to have filled out a police information check form for another purpose within the past 6 months, could they submit that police information check with their nomination papers?
Through the chair, the bylaw before the board for consideration today is that police information checks must be dated no earlier than 6 months before the date on which a candidate submits their nomination papers. There is no terms in the bylaw that requires a police information check to be obtained for other purposes. So therefore, I believe that it would be acceptable for a candidate to use a previously obtained police information check, so long as it is within the 6-month timeframe.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
Is there a risk that digging through police information checks and looking at what they hold might become the story of the 2025 school trustee election rather than the policy positions and the values and the reasons why candidates are running?
I think that could well be part of your debate. Trustee Vukadinovich?
Is it possible there could be unintended consequences of passing a bylaw requiring police information checks for trustee candidates?
That'd be a question for your fellow colleagues and something to bring up in debate. Trustee Vukadinovich?
So then that brings me back to my earlier question. Is there any risk of a person or organization taking the school board to court to object to the bylaw? If so, what could participation in a court case like this potentially cost the CBE? And as a trustee of the system, I'd like to know whether the CBE is setting aside funds just in case a group or an individual takes their school board to court over this bylaw.
To address that question, we'll have to take a recess and go in camera to discuss. So we will call a recess. We will now reconvene the meeting. Trustees, are there any additional questions or comments on the report? Seeing none, is there a trustee who wishes to bring forward a motion to proceed to first reading of bylaw number 1 of 2024? Trustee May?
That the Board of Trustees authorize bylaw number 1 of 2024, being a bylaw of the Calgary Board of Education to require police information checks for trustee candidate nominations, bylaw 1 of 2024, be given first reading.
Thank you. Do trustees have any questions about the motion? Trustee Vukadinovich?
Would I be able to move a motion to postpone the consideration of the motion? Would this be an appropriate time to do so?
Yes, you can go ahead if you would like.
Okay. I would like to move to postpone consideration of the motion to approve first reading of bylaw, to accept, first reading of bylaw 1 of 2024, being a bylaw of the Calgary Board of Education to require police information checks for trustee candidate nominations indefinitely.
Yeah. Okay. Do trustees have any questions or comments about the postponement motion? Trustee May?
Thank you. I have a question. What does indefinitely mean procedurally wise? I'm wondering, does this mean that this issue could not be reexamined with the new Board of Trustees that is elected in October 25? What does the indefinitely portion mean?
Through the chair, indefinitely means that until such time as the board were to direct a reconsideration of a bylaw, this report would not move forward. So it sits until such time as the board were to direct us to bring the bylaw forward again.
Any other questions or comments about the postponement motion? Okay, the motion on the floor is, I move to postpone consideration of the motion to accept first reading of bylaw 1 of 2024, being a bylaw of the Calgary Board of Education to require police information checks for trustee candidate nominations indefinitely. Trustee Vukadinovich, would you please open debate on the postponement motion?
Yes, thank you. There's a few reasons why I think a postponement would be good. One, a major one is that we don't have a trustee present with us today. And I always think that even with our disagreements, we work better when we've got multiple brains trying to hash out an issue and bringing different viewpoints to the table. So not only do we not have someone present today, we also have a vacancy. So I'd rather see this motion come forward for debate when we can hear from a larger number of voices. And a second reason why I am moving to postpone is the consideration of this motion is because I have seen other school boards in Alberta do that. So I was intrigued by that practice and thought that would be something that we could consider. And the third reason why I'm moving to postpone consideration of the motion is that it's evident to me that there's a lot we don't yet what bringing in police information checks about, first and foremost, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and does the proposed solution solve the problem? That anytime a board passes any bylaw or policy or any governing body passes legislation, that always needs to be a starting point, is what is the problem we're trying to solve, and is the proposed solution the most effective, efficient, economical way to solve the problem? Because even if there is a problem that needs to be solved, sometimes, when you think, okay, here's the problem, we want to solve it, you can come up with solutions that, better solutions at solving the problem. So I'm concerned about that aspect first and foremost. But then beyond that too, there's a lot that I don't understand about how well this will work in practice, and a postponement would allow us to have a look at how it works for, we heard earlier a list of a few school boards that have decided to go ahead with this type of bylaw. This would give us an opportunity to see whether those school boards, how it works for them, how those elections play out in 2025, to what extent the elections in those jurisdictions are focused on what candidates are running on and what motivated them to run, as opposed to trying to talk about basically digging up dirt about candidates. So I just want to see how it works. I would like to see how it works in other jurisdictions. And I also don't understand why members of parliament and MLAs, why those bodies don't have it. There must be some research out there somewhere. There must have been efforts at some point to bring that in. So an interjurisdictional scan would be so helpful here. In particular, the provincial government itself of Alberta does not require it for MLA candidates. So I'd like to better understand what thought process was behind not requiring it for MLA candidates.
Thank you. Are there any trustees who wish to enter first round of debate? Trustee May?
I'm not in favor of this postponement consideration motion. There's a fair process put forward for bylaws that allows trustees ample opportunity to debate and influence fellow trustees. I find this amendment obstructive and therefore I'd encourage fellow trustees to not vote in favor of this motion.
Any other trustees wishing to enter first round? Any trustees wishing to enter second round of debate? Trustee Close?
Just for public record, I support what Trustee May has shared and agree with it. So I will not be supporting the motion to postpone indefinitely.
Anyone else wishing to enter debate? Okay. Trustee Vukadinovich, do you wish to close debate?
Yes, no, sorry, enter second round.
That is your closing, yes.
Oh.
That's what I was asking.
Oh, so I can't do second round? Okay. Well, I find it unfortunate that two of my fellow trustees have weighed in and they feel that I'm being obstructive by bringing forward this motion, because my intent is not at all to be obstructive. My intent is to ask the board to do due diligence and to slow down and to give some thought to a motion before we choose to pass this. I'm deeply troubled that we would consider passing a bylaw without doing research on it, without investigating what other jurisdictions have done this, without investigating the pros and cons of jurisdictions, not just in Canada, but around the world, that have brought in criminal record checks for candidates. Democracy has been in place for a long time, and any time anyone puts a barrier in place to democratic candidates, there needs to be careful thought put to it, because sometimes when you do something, it's very hard to undo it. That's why I think a postponement is the ideal way to learn more about this at this point, because if we were to proceed with the main motion that Trustee May moved, we would be making a decision one way or another. And I don't feel even that we have the decision to make. We heard over and over earlier today, the answer was, I don't know, to one piece after another. We don't know. So why are we moving forward with this? Why not postpone? A postponement is not saying no. A postponement is saying, let's learn more. So I'm hoping that even the two trustees who said that they feel that I'm bringing this just to be a obstructionist, I'm not trying to obstruct. I'm begging the Board of Trustees to let us have the opportunity to see how this plays out in other jurisdictions, to do the research, to learn more about why in the brief history of democracy in the 300,000 year history of humankind, democracy's been very brief. Why don't more jurisdictions have criminal record checks for candidates? Criminal record checks have been around for decades, so why don't more electoral bodies have criminal record checks for candidates? I would like to know the answer to that question before moving forward with a decision that could be very difficult to undo.
Thank you, Trustee Vukadinovich. So I'll call the question. Those in favor of the postponement motion? That is Trustee Vukadinovich. Those opposed? That is Trustee May, Trustee Hack, Trustee Close, and myself. It is defeated. Thank you. All right, we'll now go back to debate the main motion. Is there any trustees wishing to enter first round of debate? Whoops. Oh, you're going to open debate? Yeah. Yep, sorry. Thank you, Trustee May.
Trustees, this is the first of many, this motion is the first of many required in the creation of a new bylaw. This discussion is a new opportunity to the board due to changes in the Local Authorities Election Act, and if the bylaw fails a reading, we will then proceed with the current practice, which requires no police information check for candidates. I would encourage trustees to vote in favor of authorizing the bylaw to be read in its entirety, allow for questions, and then participate in fulsome debate. This process is very important to the democratic process as well as our own board's governance. It is important as trustees we listen and be open-minded during debate to allow ourselves to be influenced by others as well as provide individual perspectives. We would be remiss to hinder our own governance by limiting discussion on important issues that impact trustees and trustee elections. This special meeting was called in advance of tomorrow's regular scheduled board meeting to allow time and space for a fulsome debate of such a serious bylaw to occur and have the understanding and considerations of outcomes of such a decision. I would encourage others to vote in favor to allow first reading to occur.
Are there trustees wishing to enter first round of debate? Trustee Hack?
Support first reading occurring so that we can fully understand and be read into public exactly what we will be debating. Thank you.
Any other trustees for first round? Any trustees for second round of debate? Trustee May, do you wish to close debate?
Nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call the question. Those in favor of the motion? That is Trustee May, Trustee Hack, Trustee Close, and Trustee Bolger. Those opposed? Trustee Vukadinovich opposed. That is carried. In accordance with Section 6.3 of the Board Procedures Regulation, AR 82, 2019, under the Education Act, I will now ask Ms. Patricia Miner, the Corporate Secretary, to complete the first reading of Bylaw Number 1 of 2024, the Police Information Check Bylaw, in its entirety for the record.
Calgary Board of Education, Bylaw 1 of 2024, a bylaw of the Calgary Board of Education to require police information checks for trustee candidate nominations, Police Information Check Bylaw. Whereas the Board of Trustees of the Calgary Board of Education, the Calgary School Division, is an elected authority under the Local Authorities Election Act and has the power to pass bylaws under that act. And whereas Section 21.1 of the Local Authorities Election Act allows an elected authority to, by bylaw passed prior to December 31st of the year before a year in which a general election is to be held, require a person seeking to be nominated as a candidate to provide a criminal record check, also referred to as a police information check. And whereas the Board of Trustees of the Calgary Board of Education, the Calgary School Division, deems it advisable to require a person seeking to be nominated as a candidate to provide a criminal record check with their nomination. And whereas under Sections 2 and 3 of the Local Authorities Election Act, the City of Calgary, the Calgary Board of Education, and the Board of Trustees of the Calgary Roman Catholic Separate School Division have entered into agreement for the City of Calgary to conduct joint elections. And whereas Section 28 of the Local Authorities Election Act provides that a returning officer shall not accept for filing a nomination that is not accompanied with a criminal record check required by bylaw. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Calgary Board of Education, the Calgary School Division, enacts as follows. Part 1, Interpretations and Definitions. Number 1, this bylaw may be cited as the Police Information Check Bylaw. 2, Sub 1, unless otherwise specified, words used in this bylaw will have the same meaning as defined in the Local Authorities Election Act. Sub 2, in this bylaw, A, Act means the Local Authorities Election Act, RSA 2000, Chapter L-21. Sub B, candidate means an individual who has been nominated to run for election in a local jurisdiction as a school board trustee. C, city means the municipal corporation of the City of Calgary or the area within the boundary of the city as the context requires. And D, police information check means a collection of offense-related information, including convictions, non-convictions, and other police information available for police record management systems and provincial court records in the form established by the Alberta Association of Chiefs of Police as amended from time to time. 3, where this bylaw refers to other act, bylaw, regulation, or agency, it includes references to any act, bylaw, regulation, or agency that may be substituted therein. 4, every provision of this bylaw is independent of all other provisions, and if any provision of this bylaw is declared invalid for any reason by a court of competent jurisdiction, all other provisions of this bylaw shall remain valid and enforceable. Applicability. 3, Sub 1. This bylaw applies to all elections for candidates in the city that are governed by the Act. 3, Sub 2. In the event of a conflict between a provision of this bylaw and the provision of the provision of the Act shall prevail. Part 2, Police Information Check. 4, Sub 1. Every nomination of a candidate for the office of School Board Trustee must be accompanied with a police information check obtained from the Calgary Police Service. Sub 2, police information checks submitted pursuant to subsection 1 above must be dated no earlier than 6 months before the date on which a candidate submits their nomination paper. Sub 3, every candidate for the office of School Board Trustee shall be responsible for the cost of police information check submitted pursuant to subsection 1 above. Sub 4, the police information check required under this bylaw constitutes a criminal record check, as that term is used in section 21.1 of the Act. Part 3, effective date. This bylaw comes into force on the day it is passed.
Thank you. Is there a trustee who wishes to bring forward a motion to consider the approval of the first reading of bylaw number 1 of 2024? Trustee May?
That the Board of Trustees approves first reading of bylaw 1 of 2024, being a bylaw of the Calgary Board of Education to require police information checks for trustee candidate nominations.
Do trustees have any questions about the motion? Trustee Vukadinovich?
What problem is the motion trying to solve?
And that would be a question to ask and debate, not about the actual motion itself. The motion on the floor is that the Board of Trustees approves first reading of bylaw 1 of 2024, being a bylaw of the Calgary Board of Education to require police information checks for trustee candidate nominations. Trustee May, do you wish to open debate?
Yes, thank you. In October 2024, amendments were made to the Local Authorities Election Act through the Municipal Affairs Statutes Amendment Act. The provision provided elected authorities the opportunity to consider requiring candidates to provide a criminal record check as part of their nominations papers. This also came with a quickly approaching deadline to do so. We have until December 31st to create and pass such a bylaw for it to be a requirement in the upcoming municipal election on October 20th, 2025. While this is a serious decision whether or not to require a police information check, it does require trustees to step back and examine their roles and responsibilities to and for the public. As trustees, we are leaders of the CBE and elected to guide our system based on the values Calgarians have for public education. They entrust us to lead such an organization and to provide schools and working environments that are safe, positive, inclusive, equitable, and welcoming. Our own GC7 states that the board and trustees will conduct themselves lawfully with integrity and high ethical standards. It also states that trustees model the behaviors expected of employees and students to build confidence and credibility. I am of belief that the bare minimum requirement should be a disclosure of a criminal record check, but look forward to listening to fellow trustees in debate.
Are there trustees that wish to enter first round of debate? Trustee Hack?
I am in support of this motion. I feel that it requires candidates that feel that this motion requires candidates to submit a police record check. It is a very reasonable and prudent one. I personally value honesty, transparency, and safety of students. And in any way that I can support those things in my role as a publicly elected trustee is one that I will do. Let's put trust back in trustee. The Calgary Board of Education expects every single individual who works for the CBE and who goes into our schools to have a police record check done, including all positions that interact with children on a daily basis. Everyone that is, except trustees. As a past teacher, taking volunteers on field trips, or even just receiving individuals in the classroom, we expected all volunteers to have this done. I don't believe that trustees should be exempt from this. As a mom, I would be appalled to find out that there may be a trustee in my child's school who has had a serious criminal record, punishable by imprisonment of 5 years or more, not only because they are in with vulnerable children, but because of the decisions that trustees make throughout the year. I think public accountability, trust, and transparency is something that we owe to our public, and anyone running for office should be willing to submit to apply for the job.
Thank you. Trustee Vukadinovich?
I support honesty too, wholeheartedly. This bylaw is against that. It says, I don't trust you. It says that if I ask a trustee candidate, do you have a criminal record? It says, I don't believe you. I need to see the proof about this one piece. Now, I don't want to see the proof about your age or your residence or your values or your beliefs or whether you love public education. I just want to see proof about whether or not you have a criminal record, because if you tell me, I don't believe you. So I support honesty. This bylaw is the antithesis of honesty. Also, the CB expects every employee to have a police information check, but that police information check is not publicly available. That is a huge difference. And while some people are okay with having, if they do have a criminal record, to have that publicly available, we can't make that assumption that everybody would be, because these people have complex backgrounds, and not everyone would be comfortable with having that kind of information publicly available. It could pose a barrier to running. And it's an interesting point that we don't have an expectation for trustees to have police information checks, but that's not what we're debating today. We're not talking about whether or not trustees should have police information checks. It's a great debate. Maybe we should be having that discussion. We're talking about whether trustee candidates should have a police information check that is then publicly posted. So I urge you to vote against this motion. First, there is too much that is known about the risks, the challenges, and the potential unintended consequences of passing this bylaw. When I was asking my questions earlier, over and over we heard that no one knows why we're doing this. No one knows what problem we're trying to solve. No one can tell me whether this proposed solution solves the problem it's intended to solve. No one knows why MP candidates have never been asked to submit police information checks in order to run for office, or MLA candidates. Our liberal democratic system is precious. It has only existed for a few hundred years, and I think it is dangerous for us to add any, yes, dangerous, seriously dangerous, to add any barrier to running for office without first carefully reviewing the research that is currently available about the harms of introducing police information checks as part of the candidate nomination package. Democracy is served best when only the barriers that absolutely need to be there are put in place as guardrails. This bylaw will create one more barrier that will make it that much harder for people to run for election. I would find it very troubling to be the member of a board that made it harder for people to run for public office. This is not a harmless change. It does hurt the board when we add additional hurdles potential candidates have to jump across just to put their name forward.
Thank you. Any other trustees for first round of debate? Trustee Close?
I haven't prepared my remarks, so I may not be as coherent as sometimes I try to be. There's a couple of values that drive my decision-making, especially when it comes to this. And this has been a conversation that I've had out in the community where I've asked people, you know, do you think trustees should be submitting criminal record checks with their nomination papers? And their first response is always, well, absolutely, yes. Because most of the people I've asked have been volunteers in our school or parents in our system or even staff members. I think when we talk about barriers to running for an elected office, I'd rather have a conversation about what are the parameters in place of the expectations that we have for people running in office. And we have what could be called barriers right now, where you need 25 signatures on a nomination paper. Other school boards actually require 5, which I find fascinating. We have the barrier of $100 deposit fee that we can, I think, garner back if we're elected. So there's always parameters in place for elected office, and it's not been a case for today of having a conversation around we don't know what problem we're trying to solve. What we've heard today is some of the questions couldn't be answered because we are not that level of authority. So the values that are driving my decision today to be inclined to support first reading is about demonstrating leadership in culture and values and ethical behavior. And it is about modeling values related to respect, transparency, and openness. So the debate I think we're having today is whether we should provide the electorate with more information about the background of candidates for the board. And I think we're saying yes. Some of us are saying, yes, that information is important. We're not judging that information. We're providing that information to the electorate so that they can make a value-based decision when they're voting. I think the other value that comes up for me is consistency. And we do know that in Calgary Catholic has supported a bylaw for police information checks. And we also know that our own city of Calgary municipality is debating this bylaw at their board meet or their council meeting tomorrow. So for those values and for actually some of the comments that my colleagues have made, I'm voting in support of having criminal record checks or police information checks submitted at the time of nomination papers.
Any trustees wishing to enter second round of debate? Trustee Vukadinovich?
I think another interesting thing for us to consider is I find it strange that we're seeking for police information checks to be made publicly available, which again, almost no one for any job has to undergo volunteer position or employed position. And I've got a concern that in a world of social media, there's a risk that we're creeping towards thinking that voters have some sort of parasocial relationship with people who run for office, even when they don't directly know them. People don't always share everything they're dealing with, whether they're public figures or not. So I find that an interesting, troubling aspect that I just wanted to point out. I also want to point out that this is a public office that we run for as trustees. And as a public office, anyone who stands as a candidate is open to the scrutiny of the public and the public that puts us here. By all means, I want scrutiny. I want people to ask candidates for the CBE whether they believe in the value of public education. I want people to scrutinize candidates about whether they send their own children to public schools. I want people to ask candidates if they have the skills and education to scrutinize a proposed budget. I want people to ask candidates if they have ever served on a board before. I want people to ask candidates about their backstory. Why have they decided to run? What are the life experiences that make them who they are? Why do they think that they're qualified to be a trustee for the Calgary Board of Education? So that's another reason why we'll continue to vote against this bylaw, and I'm hoping that my fellow trustees will consider, even the ones who've said that they're voting in favor of this bylaw, that they'll consider it, because I do want scrutiny of people who run for public office. I want the scrutiny to be about why they are running and why people should vote for them. Another reason why I urge you to consider voting against this bylaw is because I am very troubled about the barriers that we're putting up. There is ample research showing that certain people are more likely to have interactions with police than others, based not on the fact that it's a bad group or they're more likely to be criminals. It's based on their identity in terms of belonging to an identifiable group and living in complex socioeconomic circumstances that just puts them in contact with police more often. There is a risk that this bylaw could have a chilling effect on individuals' decision to run for office based on their identity. There is also a risk that this bylaw could have a chilling effect on individuals' decision to run for office based on their fear or anxiety around entering a police services station. And it's...
Thank you, Trustee Vukadanovich. Are there any other trustees wishing to enter second round of debate? Trustee Hack?
Public officials are entrusted with responsible decision-making. We manage resources, make policy decisions, and represent the interests of citizens. A criminal record check ensures that those seeking public office have a history of behavior that aligns with public values, reinforcing public trust in the integrity and their ability to serve ethically. What the public does with this information is up to the voting public. When an employee submits a pick, they do so to their employer. Those that make trustees employed is the public when they cast that vote. I appreciate where Trustee Close is going in being able to provide public information to make informed decisions. This is what this is about. This process is about fairness, and that leaders must be held to the same, if not higher, standard of legal compliance as the citizens they represent. After all, accountability begins at the top. Finally, elected officials are role models. Requiring a criminal record check sets a positive example for the community, emphasizing the importance of integrity and respect for the law. In short, a criminal record checks are a common sense measure to promote trust, fairness, and leadership by example in our public office.
Thank you. Any other trustees wishing to enter second round? Trustee Close?
Again, forgive me if I'm not going to be clear. I really appreciated all the questions that were asked because it's made me think more deeply about this debate. And I've appreciated the engagement of trustees in this decision-making process. And I want to say that I full-heartedly agree that scrutiny should exist for why people are running and why people should vote for them. And in fact, I believe even with a police information check that might reveal a past that was troubled or challenging, or even in some cases, no, I won't go there, troubled or challenging, I would want a trustee candidate to be able to feel the ability of why they are the best person to be selected in a governing role and why they should be at this table making decisions around policy and student success. So to me, a police information check does not preclude someone necessarily from running to be elected. It is providing information about who they are, even their life story in some ways. And I think that's important for an important value for the electorate to be informed when they vote. So I'm not discrediting or judging or setting barriers in place for people to not run. It is providing a way that provides more information, but it also models the values around respect, transparency, and openness. I think people should be transparent about their past, even if they've made mistakes.
Thank you. I'll just weigh in here that I certainly also appreciate the discussion and the questions we've had today. And although trustees are not employees of the board, and hence the expectations are different, like a vulnerable sector check, for example, we are governors of the entirety of the system. And I think it is reasonable that we consider aligning to the City of Calgary if they so pass their bylaw, and with Calgary Catholic School Division as well, to have consistency across the board. I think it is important to provide this information to the electorate as we are publicly accountable. Okay, Trustee May, do you care to close the motion?
Thank you. I also thank my fellow trustees for debate. This is a serious issue, but one that needs to be seriously considered. Holding public office, we're responsible for overseeing the largest school board in Western Canada, which includes over 143,000 students, over 15,000 staff. We have administrative regulations for the staff and volunteers who are part of our great organization, but I find in conversations with the public that they are surprised that we trustees are not held to the same standard. There is an assumption that we comply to the same requirements expected of our employees and the hardworking, tireless volunteers. These are the same standards that are required for many organizations dealing with vulnerable youth and persons. We are beholden to our roles and responsibilities, both in our interactions within the organization and in our day-to-day lives. I still remember during trustee orientation that a trustee is always a trustee. Our actions are always scrutinized, and we hold ourselves to a higher standard than just the baseline. The application requirement of a criminal record check should basically be the baseline of being a trustee, and then provide voters more information about who we are and what we stand for. Regardless of today's vote outcome of this bylaw, I am hopeful that the next trustees elected to public office take a deeper look into amending the current code of conduct to align with the requirements of staff and volunteers. This will allow for greater transparency and increased public trust in our organization. I strongly encourage my fellow trustees to vote in favor of the motion and set the tone from the top.
Thank you, Trustee May. I'll call the question. Those in favor of the motion? That is Trustee May, Trustee Hack, Trustee Close, and Trustee Bolger. Opposed? Trustee Vukadinovich? That is carried. Is there a trustee who wishes to bring forward a motion to proceed to second reading of bylaw number 1 of 2024? Trustee May?
That the Board of Trustees authorize bylaw 1 of 2024 be given second reading.
Do trustees have any questions about the motion? The motion on the floor is that the Board of Trustees authorize bylaw 1 of 2024 be given second reading. Trustee May, would you please open debate?
Nothing too much. I do appreciate previous debates, and I encourage fellow trustees to allow second reading of bylaw to occur.
Are there any trustees wishing to enter first round of debate? Trustee Vukadinovich?
Trustee Hack said that this bylaw emphasizes integrity and promotes trust, but I feel it does the opposite. It promotes distrust of candidates. By passing this bylaw, I'm worried
Point
that
of
there is a
order.
Go ahead.
I feel that this debate is not actually on the motion on the floor.
Right. So this debate is about approving second reading, Trustee Vukadinovich. So if you have, to authorize the second reading, not debating the motion, or the previous debate.
My apologies, I meant to ask a different question.
Okay, go ahead. Or, well, a debate. We're in debate. So if you have, this is debate about the second reading of the motion.
I'm concerned about approving second reading today when we don't have Trustee Marilyn Dennis here, because I would like to hear what she would say about this. And there is time to debate this. So we have a meeting tomorrow. So I'm not clear. I urge my fellow trustees to consider waiting for second reading when we can have Trustee Marilyn Dennis with us, who would love to be here today, but who is not able to be here due to circumstances outside of her control. So I would love to be able to have this debate with Trustee Marilyn Dennis present.
Thank you. Are there any trustees that wish to enter first round of debate? Are there any trustees wishing to enter second round of debate? Trustee May, do you wish to close debate?
Nothing more to add. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call the question. Those in favor of the motion? That is Trustee May, Trustee Hack, Trustee Close, and Trustee Bolger. Opposed? Trustee Vukadinovich, that is carried. In accordance with Section 6, Sub 3 of the Board Procedures Regulation, AR 82, 2019, under the Education Act, I will now ask Ms. Patricia Minor, the Corporate Secretary, to complete the second read bylaw number 1 of 2024, the Police Information Check bylaw, for the record.
Calgary Board of Education Bylaw 1 of 2024, a bylaw of the Calgary Board of Education to require police information checks for trustee candidate nominations, police information check bylaw.
Is there a trustee who wishes to bring a motion to consider the approval of second reading of bylaw number 1 of 2024? Trustee May?
That the Board of Trustees approve second reading of bylaw 1 of 2024, being a bylaw of the Calgary Board of Education to require police information checks for trustee candidate nominations.
Do trustees have any questions about the motion? The motion on the floor is that the Board of Trustees approve second reading of bylaw 1 of 2024, being a bylaw of the Calgary Board of Education to require police information checks for trustee candidate nominations. Trustee May, would you please open debate?
Thank you. I would encourage others to reflect upon other school boards within Alberta who have decided to enact this bylaw. Locally, Calgary Catholic School Division and provincially Peace Wapiti have decided to include criminal record checks. The City of Calgary passed their elections bylaw procedures, preparations for 2025 general elections last month, which included an amendment to require criminal record check for city councillor nominees. And they have directed their administration to craft a bylaw, including such, which is going to forward to council tomorrow, December 17th. Having our requirements to be concurrent with other organizations within Calgary makes sense. It will be clear to those who do research on their candidates. I've heard the argument that this requirement would increase the cost of running for office, but in reality, running for office in any capacity is not a cheap endeavor, but a valuable one. The amount of individuals requiring a police check to run for trustee is small compared to the amount of staff and volunteers who require one. Just alone in the 2021 municipal election, there were 37 people who filed for nomination and ran for public school board trustee. I would again encourage trustees to vote in favor, as we are a public office, and more specifically, a public office whose sole mandate is education of underage citizens. I again look forward to debate from my fellow trustees.
Are there any trustees that wish to enter first round of debate? Trustee Vukidinovich?
Trustee Hack said that in her opinion, this bylaw emphasizes integrity and promotes trust, but I feel that it does the opposite. It emphasizes character assassinations and it promotes digging up dirt for candidates. I'm worried that the next election campaign might inadvertently end up being one where we see reduced voter trust in democracy, because I'm worried that we might be sending a message that in election campaigns, it's more important to focus on the past of a candidate rather than on the policy debates and who the candidates are today. Voters might get the impression that the winner of the election should be the person who can dig up the most dirt on their opponent rather than the platform they're running on. Again, I disagree with the comparisons to staff members and volunteers, because staff members and volunteers do not have the results of the police information check made publicly available. And in terms of alignment, I would like to align with the Edmonton Public School Board in this. They voted against doing a police information check. I would have preferred to align with the school boards that voted to postpone this decision to allow time for research and to learn more information. And I'm hoping that the City of Calgary votes against enacting this requirement. So I don't think we should assume that they will, because I think I'm not clear why they would do that. Again, I just keep going back to, if it's such a good idea, then why haven't MPs and MLAs brought this requirement in? And Parliament and the many legislative assemblies that we have across Canada, they have much bigger staffs available than a school board does to research something like this, to look at the pros and cons, to look at the unintended consequences. They've looked at it, they've decided against it. Why? I would love to see some more curiosity on behalf of my fellow trustees as to what gave other electoral jurisdictions pause about this. And while I do value Calgary Police Services greatly, and I value the partnerships that we have with police services in our schools, when it comes to candidates for office, we want to increase the number of people who are willing to run. We want to increase people who are perhaps less represented at our board than they currently are from running. And we're doing the opposite. We're creating a barrier and adding police involvement to election campaigns where none was asked for, none was called for, none was required. So I'm
Thank
frankly
you.
confused why we're even
Trustee
considering this.
Vukidinovich, your time is up. Are there any trustees wishing to enter first round of debate? Trustee Hack?
I think one of the things that we're getting stuck on, and I want to bring it back to the point, is that no one is requiring the public to solely base their decision on this. And this isn't everything that is going to make the election. It is going to be on policy and governance and understanding the role and past experience. I do feel strongly in not withholding information from the voting public to make their decision. We can each weigh information differently, but by stopping it here and withholding that information that some may find valuable is not a good governance decision. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to enter first round? Anyone for second round of debate? Trustee May, do you wish to close debate? You sure?
Thank you. In closing, this is our opportunity to lead the way in governance and transparency within our province. We are a learning organization, and people should be aware of our past and in some cases our character. We can share our challenges and demonstrate how we can move forward from our past in a positive way. Reputation in public entities is important, and making this change is a great step forward. Let us enact this change and have our expectations for ourselves be high. Let us uphold the reputation. Regardless if this bylaw passes second reading, I would encourage all candidates to be open and transparent in sharing their criminal record check. In closing, aligning our requirements to the Calgary Catholic School Board and likely City of Calgary, as well as aligning our base requirements to our staff and volunteers, is a good decision and one in which I'm hopeful my fellow trustees vote in favor of. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call the question. Those in favor of the motion? That is Trustee May, Trustee Hack, Trustee Close, Trustee Bolger. Those opposed? Trustee Vukadinovich. That is carried. Is there a trustee who wishes to bring forward a motion to proceed to third reading of bylaw number 1 of 2024? Thank you. Trustee Hack.
I'd like to move that in accordance with section 6.2 of the Board Procedure Regulations AR 82/219 under the Education Act, the Board of Trustees authorizes bylaw 1 of 2024 be given third reading.
Do trustees have any questions about the motion? The motion on the floor is that in accordance with section 6.2 of the Board Procedure Regulation AR 82/2019 under the Education Act, the Board of Trustees authorizes bylaw 1 of 2024 be given third reading. Trustee Hack, would you please open debate?
Absolutely. Third reading can happen at the same meeting as long as it's unanimously voted on for it to pass. I'm not looking to waste anyone's time by having to revisit this decision at a later date, and would rather this be wrapped up today. I don't believe having more time will change any minds around this table, and it truly comes down to doing the right thing, not just relying on others to make the decision and then follow that. We were elected to make a decision, so let's do that. I urge my fellow trustees to vote in favor of giving third reading today. First, because this isn't the first day we're hearing about this amendment to the LAEA, and we've had ample time to consider the impacts to Calgarian families over the last few months. Giving third reading does not diminish the time given to debate, as everyone will still have the same amount of time, whether we do third reading today or do it later. By allowing it to happen today, it doesn't unnecessarily prolong the process, and a prolonged process creates a perception of indecision or inefficiencies, which in turn can erode public trust. We have everyone gather here today, so I would love to see everyone to vote in favor to do the third reading and recommend that we unanimously approve to go ahead today.
Point of order.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
We don't have everyone gathered here today. And also when I brought up earlier that I would prefer to have this debate with Trustee Marilyn Dennis, people voted against that, but no one voiced their reasons for doing so. Like, is it just me, or is Trustee Marilyn Dennis not here?
Well, we can't control who is here and not here on any given day for any different decision the board is making, so we just have to work with what we have and what is quorum.
So we
with
are
who's in
not-
attendance.
So we are not all here.
No, as in many different times during different meetings throughout the year. Are there trustees wishing to enter first round of debate? Trustee Vukadinovich?
Well, to that point, I would like to understand why trustees feel it's not necessary to have one of our trustees present for this debate. If we wait until our next opportunity to do third reading, there's a possibility that the trustee who was not able to be here with us today might be able to come. So that's one piece. And then the other piece I want to bring up is that it can be a bad sign of policy when there is a false sense of urgency. It's like phishing scams where they try to make it seem like something has to be done right away so people don't have a chance to think. We are best served when people can carefully think through policy and have the time to understand it from various angles. And not just think through policy, because I did hear Trustee Hack talk about how we've had several months to think about this. but we haven't had the benefit of asking staff or anyone to bring us the research that is available on this topic. So just thinking about a topic is not the same as actually having research and analysis. What have people published in journals on this topic? What have researchers found when they've looked at this? Like that is the information that we actually need to sift through, not just what we think about a topic. And and we don't have the information about globally what jurisdictions have considered police information checks as part of the nomination process. What are their reasons for doing so? Why have they done it? Which ones have had it and then just changed their minds? Why? We have not done the research. And so I'm urging everyone to please consider delaying the third reading, because I think we need to trust. I would like to hear the voice of Trustee Marilyn Dennis on this, first of all. That's one major reason why I would like to delay third reading. The second major reason is because it's like I said, a bad sign of policy when there's a false sense of urgency. And in this case, there's a false sense of urgency. And third, I was told that today, through the debate, I would have an opportunity to understand what is the problem we're trying to solve, and how do we know that this is the best way to solve the problem, that this is a good solution to the problem. And I still haven't heard that today. So I don't know when that part of the information happens. So for all those reasons, I would prefer to delay third reading, because that would also allow me to find out at what point, like I think I missed the stage where I was able to find out what is the problem we're trying to solve, and how do we know that the proposed solution will solve the problem.
Thank you, Trustee Vukadinovich. To your first point, we obviously, with the Education Act, we have quorum as required, so we can't determine who's here or who's not at any given meeting date, but we are in compliance. Are there any other trustees wishing to enter first round of debate? Trustee Close?
Typically, I would be in favor of delaying third reading to the next scheduled meeting, which is tomorrow. It's not another date. It would be delaying it till tomorrow.
Point
And
of order.
What has been interesting for me today is I am ready to go to third reading, because I believe we've had actually a fulsome debate, including a process for questions to be asked. And for me, the values that will not change overnight are the values that are influencing my decision around providing the electorate with more information about the background of candidates for the board. And so I'm convinced and ready to go to third reading today.
Anyone else wishing to enter first round of debate? Are there trustees who wish to enter second round of debate? Trustee Vukadinovich?
Well, I have a point of clarification, because today is a special meeting, tomorrow is a regular public meeting. Would this move to the agenda tomorrow, or would it be a pause? I'm using the wrong word. It's not called pause on the special meeting, and then the special meeting would have to be reconvened. I'm just wondering how this works.
Through the chair, at the end of today's special meeting, it will be terminated. Tomorrow at your regular meeting, in relation to the approval of the agenda, I will make the request for this report, should we not receive approval for third reading today, for third reading of this bylaw to be added to tomorrow's agenda. And as is board's process, you will vote either in favor or opposed to that item being added to tomorrow's agenda.
Trustee Vukadinovich?
If that were to be the case, how could a trustee ask for additional rounds of debate or more debate time so that to allow for a fulsome debate in one reading.
Through the chair, your board meeting procedures set out the allowed number of rounds of debate, which is 2. Robert's rules only allow for 2 rounds of debate, so I don't think increasing the number of rounds of debate, but the length of time of debate is also set out in your board meeting procedures. And as we have in the past, a trustee is welcome to bring forward a motion to extend the length of debate of your 2 rounds. So that would be an additional motion that you could consider bringing up tomorrow.
Is there anyone else wishing to enter second round of debate? Trustee Hack, do you wish to close debate?
Yes, thank you. I would like to strongly disagree with Trustee Vukadinovic's comparison to reading this third reading as a phishing scam. So I'd like that publicly recorded. We haven't done this on a whim, and we've had ample time to consider it. If the board chooses not to hear third readings today, that's within their purview. I would prefer not to allow trustees to lobby and coerce others through non-public debate and to have others' minds changed, and allowing time this evening does that. Thank you.
I'll call the question. Those in favor of the motion? That is Trustee Hack, Trustee Close, Trustee Bolger. Those opposed? Trustee May and Trustee Vukadinovich opposed. That is, it fails, right? Yeah, sorry, that's right. Where section 6.2 of the board procedure regulations state that no more than 2 readings of bylaw must be given at any one meeting unless the trustees present at the meeting unanimously agree to give the bylaw a 3rd reading. And whereas the motion to proceed with 3rd reading at today's meeting was defeated, the 3rd reading of bylaw 1 of 2024 will be added to the December 17th, 2024 regular scheduled board meeting. That concludes our agenda for today's meeting. I'd like to thank all of you who joined us for the meeting. Our next public board meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, December 17th, 2024. The meeting is now terminated.